into the history of collage as well as its influences and advantages. And you'll have the opportunity to create your own collages. And the workshop will conclude with me talking about my own process to inspire you to make while you're making your own collages. So I myself have been using collage as a medium for the past few years and have found it very useful in my own practice, especially in making images for paintings. So as you can see behind me, there's some paintings that I used, the collages that I made through the processes that I'll be talking about today, and I use those to make my own paintings. So you may be wondering, what exactly is collage and where does it come from? Collage originates from the French word coller, which is spelled as C-O-L-L-E-R, and it means to glue or stick together. It was coined by artists Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, who were interested in depicting multiple perspectives within a single space. So basically, they wanted to capture all viewpoints of an object, landscape, or anything else that they were trying to depict in a single image simultaneously. They used the word to describe works of art composed of pasted pieces of colored papers, newsprints, fabric, and so on. So they used everyday objects that they found in order to create these works of art. At the time when these artists were working, this technique was considered avant-garde, which means innovative and experimental. And it was also a mix of high and low culture. So things that were considered to be in fashion and not in fashion. So they mixed all these things together to create something new and exciting that was never done before this time. This technique also influenced other artists who pioneered similar techniques such as photo montage, which is, you can see an example in the PowerPoint. Photo montage is using pre-existing photographs drawn from mass media sources. So mass media sources means magazines, newspapers, anything that tells you about what's happening in the time. And now it's been extended to include the internet. So they use these images, these found images, to create composite images. They took images from propaganda and similar sources to talk about issues that were predominant at the time, such as industrialization and the role of women, and so on. By using this technique, they were able to put together already existing images and ideas to create something new. So photo montage can be considered the photographic equivalent of collage. So when you look at it through these two lenses of art history, you can see that the cubists, that as the cubists would have it, collage was taking everyday found materials and putting them together to create something new and exciting. And photo montage is taking that same idea one step further and using found images to talk about the issues that were relevant during the time that they were created. So from these images, we can see that collage has influenced artists throughout all of art history, but why should we use collage? Collage has a lot of advantages in order to talk about issues and ideas that already exist and to create something new. You can either use the collage to create further images, such as I do, to create reference images for paintings, animations, or any other work of art, or you can use it as the final artwork itself. By thinking about collage as a multi-layered work of art, the process allows us to visually edit composition without having to redo the finished elements. By doing so, it opens up the ability to play with perspective and space through reconfiguration and moving around of the visual and formal elements, themes, compositions, and so on. It presents the possibility to represent various viewpoints and experiences and bring together otherwise unconnected images and ideas that would normally not go together. Each element that you use will contain a different meaning. For example, in my own work, as you can see in the previous few images, and you'll continue to see examples of my work as the presentation goes on, I use a lot of patterns. Patterns have a history of representing oppression. Similarly, color plays a huge role in my own artwork. By bringing together color, you can talk about associations of it with gender, emotions, and so on. So the specific elements that you choose and introduce into your artwork can change its whole meaning and can say a lot about the final outcome of the work. By doing this, you can create unexpected and new meanings by bringing together these individual elements through a contrast of forms, complementary colors, and so on. In my own work, the pairing of patterns with colors, the pairing of patterns and colors with the Muslim veil emphasizes ideas of women and associations of the Muslim veil as a tool of marginalization, oppression, and so on. So now that you know a little bit about the history of collage as well as my own influences and how I use collage, I want to introduce you to an activity so that you can also make collage while so for these activities, you can use things that you already have at home. So some things that you'll need is paper for the final collage. So whatever material you'll use to create the final work on, some scissors to cut, or X-Acto knife, or anything that you can use to cut, glue, tape, something to stick with, pens, pencils, markers, crayons, something to draw with, and some images, patterns, writing, anything that you find interesting, or you can use to talk about some issues in your work, any ideas that you want to talk about while you're making these collages. So these can be images that you find on the internet, printouts from magazines, newspapers, can be scraps of papers, leftover pieces and cutouts from other projects. So if you have an old artwork or something that you really enjoyed making, but you only like a part of it, you can cut that out and use that to make something new. So I want you to take this time to choose some materials that you would like to use to make your own collages today. So I've kind of outlined some guidelines for you to follow while making your own collage at home. So something to consider is including two patterns and or textures, something interesting in the background, three different types of colors, and one figure. When you're choosing the colors, think about what colors can go together. What are they complementing each other or not? And a figure, which can be an object or a form, which you can use to make. You can use a form if you wish to make an abstract image. It doesn't have to be a figure, a person. It can be an object or a form as well. So while you guys take the time to look through your own materials and find these kind of objects to work with, And now that you've seen a few of my own examples in the previous slides, I'll talk to you about my own process of making collage and how I get from the first steps of choosing what I want to include as the elements to the final product. And I'll show you more examples as well as I go along. So my own process of making collage starts with deciding what to include first and foremost as the main element. That is what is going to stand out. So for me, usually this is a veiled figure, which emerges, as I was talking about before, through my research of Muslim women and acts of veiling. So I either find an image of a figure from the internet or the magazines in a position that I want, and I draw it out either physically or digitally. I want to emphasize that this process can be done either physically, you can draw things out, or you can do it on your computer digitally as well. By choosing the position that the figure is going to be in, that helps me find what the final artwork will be talking about. So the position of the figure or the way that the object is located will talk a lot about the ideas, about larger ideas in your own artwork. Similarly, by separating the image from the environment, will help it stand in its own right. So you can see the difference between the image on its own and how the image will look like with something in the background. And by doing this, you can reference larger ideas and specific ideas that will come together and create something new. The next step after you have your isolated image or your isolated main element is to search for patterns, colors, textures, and so on. So while you're doing this and searching for the other elements that you'll include in your artwork, you move back and forth between the main element and the other elements that you'll be including, and you find connections between them. By looking at them separately and together, this allows you to create new meanings and connections. For example, if the figure is black and white, then you might want to look into brightly colored backgrounds. Or like I have in this image, a colorful figure, then I might want to include something simple in the background. So you really want to see what works well together visually as well as through larger ideas and themes that you're going to be working with. So if the figure has a particular pattern such as stripes, dots, and so on, then you can look into complementary or similar shapes, colors, and forms. So once you have a few elements chosen, you can place them physically on the paper and move them around and see where they'll go. By doing this, you can control the perspective and space of your artwork. By doing this and separating the elements of your collage into, you can play with all the elements of art and design, which you'll be learning more about in first year. So the elements of art are the basic elements that are used by artists to create a work of art. They are what you use to make your artwork aesthetically more pleasing. So some examples of elements of art are line, which is the mark made by a pointed tool such as a brush, pen, stick. So it's connecting 2 points in space or on the paper. A shape, which is a flat enclosed area with 2 dimensions, length and width. Artists use both geometric and organic shapes. So these can be organic and geometric. So geometric are hard line shapes and organic are soft edges. Um, Color, which is the most dominant element created by light. The three properties of color are hue, value, and intensity. Value is the degrees of lightness and darkness. The difference between value is called value contrast. Form are objects that are three-dimensional, having length, width, and height, and can be viewed from many sides. Forms take up space and volume. Texture describes the feeling of the actual surface. The surface quality of the object can be real or implied. So you can actually also use real texture. You can add things that have feeling to them, such as fur or feathers, something that you can touch, something tactile. Or it can be implied, which means that you draw it so it looks like there's texture, but the texture is not actually there. And space, which is used to create the illusion of depth. It can be two-dimensional or three-dimensional, negative or positive space. So these are all things that you should be thinking about when you're making your collage. What types of lines are you going to be including? Shapes, colors, what's the value going to be? Are you going to choose light colors, dark colors? What types of forms, textures, and the space, overall space, is it three-dimensional? Will it feel like the viewer is looking into a space, and so on and so forth. And you'll be learning more about these elements in first year art history as well as throughout your time at OCAD. And these are kind of the main things that you should be thinking about while you're creating this work in order to get different types of elements and make your artwork a little more interesting. So by using collage, one of the biggest advantages is that if you make a mistake, you're not tied to it at the moment. So you can change things around. Once you have all your elements laid out in front of you, you can, once you've chosen everything, you can move things around and see where they'll go. You can cut things out, rearrange them, and even make different versions of the same artwork by changing some things. So you can just change, you can have everything the same and just change the color of of one element. So for example, in this work, if I wanted to see how it would look different, I can just make the figure more blue or more a different shade of green if I want, and see how that changes the artwork. So one little thing you do can change the overall effect of your work. And by using collage and changing some things around, you can visualize this without having to scrap the whole work and start again. So this technique involves a lot of trial and error in order to explore various combinations. One way to think about it, one way to kind of think about collage is as thinking through making. So you don't already have a predetermined plan of what the final artwork is going to be, but instead you're seeing what you come across, what type of things inspire you, what kind of ideas do this, some elements will speak to you and you'll choose them, and that will totally change the whole meaning. And while you're making it, you'll have different ideas of what the artwork will become instead of having something already mapped out from the beginning. And even if you do have something mapped out, it can change while you're doing this process and making the collage. So what I'm trying to say is that it allows for a lot of rooms to make mistakes, and especially if you're not comfortable with using more permanent mediums that once you've put down you can't erase, such as any kind of paint or charcoal, stuff like that, that once you have down you can't really take it off. So this will allow you to do that instead of scrapping the whole thing. And like I was saying earlier, if you even come up with something and you're not happy with it, you can cut it out and make it through collage into something totally new. So one other thing about this medium is about the process of making collage is that you can either do it physically through paper, like you can actually find images in magazines on the internet, print them out, cut it, and do it like that, or you can make it digitally. So if you're not comfortable or if you're more comfortable with using softwares or you're in a design program, then you can use one of the programs that you have, even just Photoshop, which is simple enough for a beginner to use. You can use those softwares and do exactly the same process that I talked about today through that digital format. So it really depends on what your preference is. For me, I prefer to do it by hand because I'm a more hands-on person. So I prefer to actually have everything laid out in front of me and move it around and play around with all the elements and see what I come up with. So sometimes I already have some things that I collect over time, some images. It could also be poetry. Anything is open to use in this medium. And sometimes I'll be collecting those things and then I'll have a bunch of elements that I'll want to use to create something, or sometimes I'll have an idea of what I want to create and then I'll find something, some elements and images to go with that idea and to create something that speaks to an idea or a theme. So it's really open, and you can do this in a lot of different ways. So once again, I want to remind you of the materials that you need to make collage. I know that the times are hard, and because of the situations, it might be hard to go out and buy materials, but this activity and the process of making collage can be done with things that you find in your own home. So like I said, a lot of magazines, newspapers, you already have lying around. You could even take old books, some passages from books, poetries. It can be writing. It doesn't have to be images. It's pretty open, and if you don't have any of these materials available, you can even take a blank piece of paper, draw out different elements and cut them and put them together in new ways. And you don't have to follow these guidelines while you make it, but it will just make it more interesting to have some variety, patterns, colors, textures, and some sort of a figure or an object to ground all of that together. Think about contrast and how I was talking about before. If your main element has a certain color or pattern, then think of ways to complement it. And what can you put together to create something new? Here are some reflection questions to think about while you make your collage. why did you choose the particular element? What does each element mean to you? And in a larger sense, how do the elements come together? What new meanings do they create? What is the possible future of collage for you? So these are just some questions to get you thinking about what you're choosing and why you're choosing those things, and what meaning is being created by those elements coming together. For example, I was talking about earlier in my own work how by pairing colors and patterns with the Muslim veil, I can talk about ideas of oppression and marginalization of Muslim women. So similarly to that, you can do a little research on the elements that you choose. You don't have to do it beforehand, but once you've chosen a particular element, you can do a little bit more research into that and find out more hidden meanings behind those works. And that will allow you to create new meanings and come up with larger themes. You can actually talk about a lot of ideas, issues through those elements. And also think about what the possible future use for collage is for you. Will you be using that collage to make other artworks? Will you be using that as the final artwork? I've used, like I said before, I've used collage to make reference images for paintings and even animations. You can kind of see already existing images, ideas, and put them together in new and exciting ways. And even old artworks of yours, maybe you have something from high school that you like, but you're not too happy with, and you can kind of change it around, add new things to it. So you won't really, you're not really tied to the final work until you glue everything together. So I wanted to show you some examples from a collage workshop that I led with Truth and Dare Project Community Days for an exhibition titled Misinterpreted. So these are all examples of collages that were created through a workshop that I did, similar to the one that I'm sharing with you today. And you can see the different types of artwork that emerge from it. And these are all created from the guidelines that I set out. Now, you don't have to be tied to those guidelines, but they might help you narrow your search and help you to choose your elements, and then you can play around with them and put them together in new and exciting ways. You can even put together similar elements to create a series of artwork by using similar colors, similar patterns and shapes, all the formal elements of art and design. So yeah, this is just photos of me leading the workshop and the kinds of supplies that you can use. You can use wallpapers, magazines, anything that you find.
Hey, Iman, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
I think you need to turn your screen share back on.
Oh, did it turn off?
Yeah, I just can't see the pictures that you're talking about.
Oh. Oh no, it says that I can't show. Can you see it?
Yeah, now we can see.
Okay, so is this where I kind of lost it from? Or earlier?
You were talking about there were pictures of you doing the workshop.
Yes, so that's here. So these images are just to kind of show you the types of things that you can use to make. And also don't be afraid to get messy and have a lot of different things in front of you. By laying all this stuff out visually, it will help you more than anything to visualize and find new ways. Sometimes unexpectedly you'll have 2 or 3 images lying together and you can be like, oh, I didn't realize these look really great together, and it says something unexpected or something new and exciting. So yeah, that's kind of the end of my presentation. I don't know if that was too short.
No, you're right on time.
Okay.
Thank you so much.